Siamo davvero fortunati qui stasera alla scuola Ritmix perché abbiamo da noi un artista di fama mondiale, un tastierista, produttore ed anche compositore, conosciuto in tutto il mondo, che sia jazz, rock, funk, world beat. Questo musicista è la forza creativa dietro a molte produzioni acclamate a livello internazionale. Per citare soltanto alcuni degli artisti con i quali ha collaborato: George Benson, i Carisma, Smokey Robinson, Steve Lukather, Vinny Colaiuta e non dimentichiamo mai lo scomparso Jeff Porcaro. Lo dice lui stesso che la sua missione è fare la musica. Quindi facciamo anche noi un po' della nostra musica, e cioè, come si dice in inglese, put your hands together, per dare il nostro benvenuto a David Garfield. Eccolo. David Garfield. Nice to meet you. Welcome. My name's Alex. Welcome. So, at what age did you know you wanted to become a musician?
When I was young, I loved music and just loved it. I wasn't thinking about making a career of it, but when I got to be probably in my early teens, 12, 13 years old, I started to think that I wanted to pursue music.
Tell us a little bit about where you grew up. I know you were born in Chicago, but you also spent some significant years in New York and St. Louis. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. And what music did you listen to while you were growing up?
When I was growing up in New Jersey, New York area, there was the rock music of the time was becoming very progressive and popular. It was the late 60s. And there were groups like Cream and Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Chicago. And they were all leading me towards jazz because that music was all influenced by jazz and had a lot of improvisation. So eventually I discovered jazz and became a jazz enthusiast. But I originally started out with rock and roll.
Now I know that you also spent some time, you decided then to relocate to the West Coast. I happen to be particularly interested in knowing, why did you decide to relocate to the West Coast?
Well, I decided I was doing a lot of music in St. Louis in 1974, and I wanted to move to New York, actually. But at the time, a lot of the people I liked from New York were moving to the West Coast. It seemed like there was a momentum happening in that direction, California, because at the time I was listening to groups like Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters, Weather Report, and people. They were all relocating to the West Coast, and I remember that the Tonight Show band in New York moved to the West Coast. The West Coast seemed where it was happening.
I'm curious also to know a little bit then, what was it like for you, David, to arrive in Los Angeles and discover that unique sound of Jeff Porcaro, who was playing with Steely Dan at that time? He was, if I'm not mistaken, he was a teenager. He was only 19 years old. Right.
When I first came out to L.A., I had a friend that I had met in high school through the high school music program named Carlos Vega. He was a wonderful drummer. Yep. And when I came to California, I called him up, and he was playing in a band with the youngest Porcaro brother, Steve Porcaro. And so they were rehearsing at the Porcaro house. And in the band, I might add, in that particular band, I met these guys the first month I was in California, was Carlos Vega, Steve Porcaro, keyboards, Steve Lukather and Michael Landau were the guitar players in the band. And so I got introduced to their band, and they were all very enthusiastic about music. And of course, the older brother Jeff was playing in Steely Dan. Everybody was talking about him. He was a big hero because he had a big prestigious thing happening. And back in those days, a lot of recording was going on in Los Angeles. There was lots and lots of records being made there.
I wanted to ask you, in particular, for those people here, David, they may not be familiar with this. Could you explain to us a little bit what the genre West Coast sound means?
Well, West Coast sound is something that people that don't live in the West Coast came up with. It's a name. But, you know, over the years, I have a lot of friends in Scandinavia and in Japan that really, you know, they talk about West Coast. And what that refers to is a lot of the music that came out of the studios and the kind of the in musical environment. There was groups of people like Toto and David Foster, Bill Champlin, Jay Graydon. There's a lot of, it's basically just a sound that people have, it's a name that people have put on the sounds that have come out of the West Coast. But I wanted to tell you that, I mean, the thing is, a lot of recording went on in LA, and there was a lot of great musicians that were in the studios every day, and they were being very focused on the sounds of their instruments and how to make great records and come up with great parts. So there was an environment, and a lot of, like I say, a lot of records were being made. Artists needed bands. There weren't, so many bands. Like a particular artist would have a band of studio musicians, and they would help create the records and the sounds and everything. So out of that grew this thing that they call it the West Coast sound, but it just grew out of the environment of people making records.
I'm also aware that as we have already heard, that you're an avid jazz fan, of course. Mm-hmm. I've read that you like to listen to Monk, Miles Davis, and so I'd like to ask you if you would share with us how jazz music has influenced your sound.
Well, it's almost like how has jazz not influenced my sound? Right. Easier to answer. I mean, the thing I love about jazz is what drew me to jazz is improvisation. And those were the qualities of the rock music I grew up with that led me to jazz. It was the improvisation, it was people jamming and listening to each other and reacting and playing like we're going to do for you today. Listening to each other and reacting creates something that's totally unique. It's not planned, it's not rehearsed. It'll never sound the same way twice. And there's a feeling there.
This one is a fun question. This next one is a two-part question. If you could please name 5 musicians, David, that were fundamental in your musical growth, in your understanding of playing the keyboards. Well, just off the top of your head.
Yeah, I'd have to say Herbie Hancock first, McCoy Tyner, Eddie Palmieri, Richard T., and Chick Corea.
Okay. Is of these 5 musicians' names, could you just give us one word, just wrapped up in one word, what these mentors transmitted to you? So, Richard T.
Soul.
McCoy Tyner?
Mastery. Masterful.
Herbie Hancock?
Innovator.
Chick Corea?
Creative.
And Eddie Palmieri?
One word?
Only one word. Just one word if you can.
Salsa.
Salsa.
It's another word for that. Masacote.
Masacote in español.
That means the stuff.
Could you talk to us a little bit about the creation of the band Charisma?
Sure. Well, when I was 18 and I was living in Los Angeles, I had always dreamed of starting this band, Charisma. I had a concept. The concept was I was going to do instrumental music with musicians that had a lot of charisma, that were really fun to listen to and watch. And I was going to have a band of all these great musicians. However, I was going to wait and do this later in my life with the right time, but I was 18 and I was trying to make it in Los Angeles, and I could never get to play the kind of music I wanted to play anywhere with anyone.